Sure.
Yeah, looks like everyone else is joining us.
I sent
So,
you a one-page outline
oh, okay,
of just the very brief discussion of all the different steps that we do.
okay. Oh, I see it. Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I think Andy and Reggiani prepared a presentation, and we'll go through that.
Okay.
You could see what we do, and then let me share this with the rest of the group. I'll forward it to the gang here. So looks like Ashish has joined us. Remember
Yep.
him?
Oh, yeah.
I
I
remember him.
remember Ashish well.
Yep. He actually he actually used your Fortran software in his master's thesis, right, to
Oh, yeah.
analyze the
Right.
eddy
Yeah.
covariance data. Um, uh,
And Martin should be coming in here, I hope.
yeah, and Andy's going to join us as well. Sandy's on his way to Jordan to see his family, so he might not join us today.
So did you have a good discussion with those guys on Friday
Oh,
with
the
Chuck McCollum? Chuck Collum?
well, we did. It's weird, Larry. I mean, we're trying to find another site in Wyoming for a tower, and they've proposed a site, and we've given our technical opinion that it's not an adequate site because
Yeah.
it's wedged in between two highways, and on the upwind side of it, there's a row of trees along the fence line, right?
Oh, boy.
And you know, we give our technical opinion, and they sort of ignore it or don't want to talk about it, right?
Hmm. Well, that's critical. The wrong site is a non-fixable problem.
Well, and there's another site, and this is where we wanted your opinion. There's a site in Gunnison, Colorado, which is flooded. It's an irrigated field, flood irrigation, and there's water the whole time on the surface, right? So when we installed the tower, we couldn't stick in the soil heat flux
No,
plates or the
no.
whatever. But and we want to move the tower to a place where it's a little higher ground. It still gets flooded, but at least it gives us a chance to put sensors in, and they don't want to
Hmm.
move it. And
Hmm.
so, and they want us to keep it there, and there's no communication with the cell phone tower.
Oh,
So,
dear.
and so what would you do in a flooded situation? We could measure LE, H,
Yeah, we
and
we had a
RN.
flooded situation in one site once, and what it meant is we really couldn't get G.
Yeah,
So we didn't try to close the energy balance.
yeah.
I know that some people working in rice, they will put they can't do this hourly, but they'll put temperature sensors in the water to get storage. And over a period of, days or so, a day or two, you can at least estimate the storage in the water. So there are ways of dealing with it, but if it's only a really shallow layer of water, it's really hard to get it at all.
Yeah, well, remember that tower we put on Elephant Butte Lake, remember, with back in the down in the Rio Grande area?
Yeah.
Remember, we
Yep.
we we put thermocouples in the water, right,
Yep.
at the different depths to try
Yep.
and establish that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
that
that's
was
the
a
only
whole
way
different
to
situation.
to
We were
to
set
deal
up
with
to
that.
do that, right? But
Yeah.
here we're set up to measure soil heat flux. That's what we bought, and now we
No, and
have a
then
flooded
and
site.
even if you put the plates in the soil under the water, the plate won't function right.
No,
It's,
no.
it violates too many. I mean, you're assuming the plate has the same thermal conductivity as the soil around it. I mean, there's not even close to that. So flooded areas, it doesn't mean the eddy covariance measurements and net radiation can't be made. You just can't really check closure.
Yeah. That's right. So anyway, these are the battles that we do with the Upper Colorado folks. We say this is
Okay.
not a good site. We got to move it.
We
They
were,
say,
I guess
no, we want you to keep it.
we were fortunate in that all of our 5 sites, we chose them.
Yeah.
They met our criteria eventually. It doesn't mean it was easy, but nobody told us what site we had to use or not use. And so we didn't have that problem.
Well,
It's
and there's
hard enough to
one.
find a site that you think is right, but if somebody's going to be looking over your shoulder, that makes it even more difficult.
Well, that's right. And they hire us because we're supposed to be the experts, right? And we're
Yeah.
saying this is not a good location.
No, and that's a critical thing because, like I said, an inappropriate site is a problem that it's fatal. It can never be fixed, right? So you want to avoid that one.
Yeah,
We got enough problems as it is. We don't need bad sites.
that's right.
The challenge, Dr. Hips, is that Upper Colorado River Commission, basically, when we mentioned that in the call on Friday, their response was, well, you're world-class researchers. It's your job to figure it out. And
Now, that's disingenuous because you can figure out solvable problems, but that's not a solvable problem.
yeah. Chuck seemed to think that there was other researchers in the West, he said, who had solved this problem, but he was confused why we hadn't figured it out.
Hmm.
So that's a challenge right now.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, he sent us a paper about folks in Florida, I think, that were doing eddy covariance measurements in mangrove swamps,
Yeah.
right? Yes, they didn't measure soil heat flux.
No,
They
you
didn't
can.
measure that, right?
Like I said, it doesn't mean you can't do the eddy covariance. You just can't get a reliable check on energy balance closure.
Yeah,
So those years where they flood irrigated our site, the old site in Wyoming, and they put way too much water on and was standing water, we simply didn't analyze the G because we didn't believe what the plates under it had
yeah,
any meaning, and we couldn't. It wasn't deep enough to get sensible temperature profiles. So that site, we told them, here's the unclosed totals for everything, and that's all there is.
yeah.
But it was still useful information. And like I said, and I've been talking to some people that are looking at rice paddies, and that was the discussion that Bill Custis and I had with them is if the water's deep enough, you just have to put in some temperature sensors, and over some period of time, you'll be able to get the storage, and then you can attempt to get closure, not hourly or even daily, but maybe longer than that. So it's
Well,
possible in that sense.
and that assuming that the water's not moving, right?
Yes, yes.
That it stands still.
Yeah, and it's even
Anyway,
like if the irrigation water is cold, the storage can be quite large because most of the energy is going to heat the water. But if the irrigation water is warm, the storage will be less. I mean, so yeah, it's right now we don't have a flooded site.
yeah.
So
Well, listen, it looks like we got everyone present. I think, did we all meet each other last meeting? Martin,
yes,
yeah? Were you
yep.
present last time, Martin? I can't remember.
I think I was in on the call, but didn't say anything. But hi, I'm Martin Schrader. I work for Larry here at Utah State.
Okay.
He does most of the
See y'all.
analysis now. Runs the field sites and runs all of our software, and gap fills does the whole thing. So
Okay. Well, good to have
he
you.
just got back from a yurt trip in the Uintas.
Oh, all right. An adventure. At least there's snow in the mountains, right? Yep.
There was some. It was not as much as I would like. It's been better in previous years.
Skiers never have enough snow.
That's right. They're always complaining.
Well, good. I think thanks for agreeing to meet. We had talked about, you know, the Upper Colorado folks keep saying they want to publish data set that's uniform and all that stuff. And so I wanted to get ahead of them in this conversation
Sure.
about processing and what you do and what we do and make sure we're on the same page, right? I
No,
think
it's a good thing, and I think this will come up at the Chapman Conference next fall
yeah,
in Boulder. This idea of what should be the minimum standards to end up with credible edit covariance results. And the sad fact is there are some networks I'm aware of that have started, and the people don't know what they're doing. They don't have them cited in the right place, and they're going to create a lot of confusion and bad data. So it's worth doing this.
yeah.
We won't have any problem, I don't think, with ourselves, but not all the networks have
Yeah.
people like that.
That's right.
I can tell you that from experience.
And I see
And
Andy
so,
shaking, nodding. He agrees with you.
yeah, it's so this is something that's good to do, and then we can, we don't have to do everything exactly the same. I mean, there's still scientific flexibility. There has to be, but if we can agree on at least the minimum things everybody does,
Yeah.
that would lead toward credible results, and then different sites have different needs, and different scientists will have slightly different approaches. I'm a believer we need to respect that. But certain things we have to deal with, and we can talk about that.
Well, I suggested that I think Andy and Reggiani worked on a presentation, right, Andy? Do you
Great.
want to going through what we do, right, so that you can
Yeah.
have an idea? Larry just before the meeting sent us a document of his procedures. I forwarded it to you all, but I know you won't have time right now to look at it. But let's start with our presentation. Does that sound all right? And then
Yep.
we can have the discussion from there. So, Andy, do you want to go for it?
Quick
You're
question,
muted. You're muted.
Christopher, should we record this? Sammy had asked about that. Up to you.
If everyone's in favor of
No
recording,
problem. No problem.
so do I get to do that? I
Yeah.
guess. All right. Record to this computer. All right. And I guess you'll get a message saying,
Yep.
are you okay with that, right?
Yep. It's got it.
Okay. Andy, do you want to share your screen and go for it?
Okay. I thought Reggiani was going to present. I'll put her on the spot. Let's see here. And let's see.
You need to put it in presentation mode.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to get this thing out of the way here.
There we
Okay.
go.
All right. Okay, so we'll go over our data processing and quality control. So first thing, for a quick outline, we'll organize the input data that we need. We'll process through EdiPro, and then we apply UNL screening approach because of a problem with EdiPro. And then we'll quickly go over a couple different ways that we do our screening and gap filling. So the inputs obviously are the 10 hertz data, okay? But then for EdiPro, and again, that's what we're using. We switched over from our in-house data processing and switched to EdiPro back in about 2015. And so they require some biomet data, some basic temperature and radiation data, and a few other parameters. It's very simple to organize, okay? Just a few parameters. And then the dynamic data, the canopy height, which is changing, of course, and then the instrument height. In our case, we have two different instrument heights that we measure, and then your separations and your path lengths and all that kind of information that you need to put in there. So, oops. So here's a screenshot of the EdiPro program. There's lots of inputs, lots of choices that need to be made here. One comment I have about EdiPro is I've never made so many errors processing eddy covariance fluxes as I have since I started using EdiPro. Some of it is user error because it's so easy to change things, or not click on a box that should have been clicked on, or sometimes there's program errors that you make some changes and then you save this as a project file, and then you go and you open the project file, but some of the changes that you made earlier got changed back to the default values. So I think finally EdiPro is kind of getting most of those bugs worked out, after, fortunately they were very open to having people, provide feedback into making the program a little bit better. But even with EdiPro, it takes, you got to have some knowledge about what you're doing and where you're setting things, and you have different choices. You can choose different ways to make the frequency response correction. You can have different flagging procedures, so it's still a fairly involved process. They do have a pretty reasonable manual that they try and explain those things and give lots of references if you want to look that up. But the idea here is that you make your selections how you want to run your data, and then you save it as a project file, and then you can open this up again and run another batch of data. So that's sort of the nice thing about it. Okay. So yeah, as I said, you've got multiple processing options. You've got multiple statistical analysis that you can do. You can run the spectral analysis and those corrections. There's a few different or multiple options you can use here. And again, someone who's going to be using this really has to know which one they want to use and why they want to use it. And so that's a bit of an issue still, with processing data with something like EdiPro. And then EdiPro will generate some output files also. So some of the processing options here, if you have a GIL WinMaster or WinMaster Pro, there's this WBoost error that they actually built into the program, so you don't have to fix it before you process your data. You can choose or to apply the angle of attack correction, axes rotations, and of course, there's 2 rotations or 3 rotations, so you have to choose whether you're going to do 2 or 3. If you have closed path sensors, then you want to select time lag compensation. You have to decide if you're going to apply the WPL correction. Like I said, there's a number of different options here. And then if you have a 7500 and you want to apply the error, for the internal heating, the sensible heat components, then there's parameters you need to enter in if you click on this box, right? So, and then, you have your rotation method, double rotation or triple rotation, the detrending method, a block average, so exponential filter, that kind of a thing. And then you can also use this to, if you have a closed path sensor, you can use EdiPro to determine the time lag. And so that's sort of a nice feature. When we were using our own in-house software, we would run the fluxes one time and estimate the time lag, and then come up with a file that had the time lag, and then feed that file and reprocess the data. So that's sort of one nice thing about EdiPro is that you can do the time lag and get the final fluxes out sort of all in one step. Okay. So, but as you can see, there's a number of options here for how you actually process the data. Okay. Then there's a number of statistical analyses you can choose. You can calculate, for example, the skewness and kurtosis. You can determine how many spikes you see in your data based on some parameters that you set. Like, for example, the spike count. There's a couple of papers here where they have different methods to determine if there was a spike in your data, and then it counts the number of spikes in the data, that kind of thing. So again, here there's a lot of different options, and again, you really need to know what you're doing here if you're going to start choosing these options. So, and then the next thing in the list here is spectral analysis and corrections. So that's another nice thing about EdiPro. You know, when we were using our in-house software, we'd have to run the fluxes, and then we had a different program to run the spectra and co-spectra, and you didn't necessarily run spectra and co-spectra for every half hour. You sort of selected the best periods and then ran spectra and co-spectra. But here, at least with EdiPro, you can run them for all times, and then you have that data and you can look at it, you know, at a later time period. But then again, there's lots of different options here for running the spectral analysis and the corrections here. Okay. And then for the output files, there's again a couple different formats you can use. One of the nice things is if you have missing periods, it will insert lines into the final output so that you don't have to go and do that. That's another step that gets eliminated, that gets done automatically. They have a few different formats. One format is got the Ameriflux time label and sign convention. I think there's a FluxNet time label and sign convention you can choose. So, you know, if you're going to end up submitting those data to one of those groups, then, you know, it saves you some time having to change the format around, things like that. So again, as is listed here, lots of different corrections that can be applied. There's a few different formats that can be applied, like the frequency response corrections. They have, I think, 3 different ways you can apply those. Spike removals, a couple different ways you can determine if there's a spike in the data. And then also you can apply some instrument-specific corrections that are already within EdiPro. They're sort of built into the software. So I think, like, for example, if you're using a Krypton hygrometer, there was a correction for that, and I think that might be built into EdiPro. I can't quite remember. We haven't used those anemometers or those humidity sensors for quite a while. But. And then the other nice thing about EdiPro is it generates flags, quality flags for the fluxes. Okay, and right now they have 3 different ways that you can generate these quality flags. They're listed here: Modern Foken 2003, and then this Gokid et al. 2006. So they have 5 quality grades, 0 to 5. The Foken has 9, and then Modern Foken has just 3, right? 0, 1, and 2. 0 is the best. 1 is marginal, but generally suitable, and then 2 is a flux that should be rejected, right? So that's the nice thing. you run the fluxes, and then at the same time, the quality control flags get generated too. So you don't have to run the data a second time for that. Because I don't remember with the other two, but this Modder and Foken, they use the 10 hertz data to generate the flags. Okay, they do basically a stationarity test to generate the flag. Okay. The problem is, at least what we've found for Modder and Foken is, and we talked about this the last meeting, is that their flags don't seem to work well. And so we manually have to generate our own flags, basically. We're using the identical technique, but we get very different answers than what EdiPro generates. Okay? And so what we do is, we generate 5-minute fluxes, and then we generate 30-minute fluxes, and then we compare a set of the 5-minute fluxes to the 30-minute fluxes, and if they're very different, that suggests the stationarity was insufficient, and so the flux should be rejected. Otherwise, the flux would be accepted, right? And so this is a year of data. Again, this is CO2 data, not H&LE data. But the two figures here are the flags that are generated by EdiPro, okay? And here, the top figure, we're looking at plus or minus 200 micromoles per meter squared per second. And then the bottom one, we just changed the scale to plus or minus 100, okay? So if you see an orange flag or an orange circle, that means that flux was determined to be bad, okay? And so it would be left out of the further analysis. But what you can see here, like for example, at nighttime, there's a number of points that were accepted. The flag said these fluxes were okay, but based on the magnitude, there's no way you could have a CO2 flux of plus 80 micromoles per meter squared per second in the middle of the night. So again, this is the flags generated by EdiPro. We're applying the exact same method, but as is showing here, we get very different results. Again, the top plot is plus or minus 200, and the bottom plot is plus or minus 100. And now you can see this is the exact same year of CO2 flux data, and there's many orange circles, many orange dots here, where our flag said no, the stationarity was not. There was insufficient stationarity during these hours. Okay, so what we have been doing is basically generating our own flags. Okay, that's the end point here. We're generating our own flags. Then for some of the sites that we're working on with this ARPA-E project, we're using Tovi from Lycor. So Tovi is a screening and gap filling software package. It screens and gap fills fluxes, and then it also screens and gap fills environmental data, temperatures, incoming solar radiation, maybe net radiation. I can't remember right now. So it's basically a big time saver because you can fairly quickly.
I'm on a conference call right now. I'll be back.
Excuse me. You can fairly quickly load data into it, and then Tovi will do some screening and gap filling for you. And so here's an example here where you can see the gaps here, the white strips, and then Tovi comes in and does the screening and gap filling for you, basically. And there's a methodology that's used in Tovi. It's based on this paper by Reichstein and Falge et al. It's a 2005 paper. And so, yeah, this software is again, it takes a little bit to get used to and to understand it, but then once you get that under your belt, it's a fairly quick way to screen and gap fill fluxes. So, and then there's an alternative procedure that we've been doing at our Ameriflux sites in Nebraska here. And so we use a second order polynomial, and then we look at the relationship between Rn minus G and Le, and then Rn minus G and H. And so we fit a polynomial relationship. We determine the relationship in the morning, and then we use a second relationship in the afternoon. And then any missing fluxes in the morning get filled in with the morning relationship, and any missing fluxes in the afternoon get filled in with the afternoon relationship. And then we also take into account if there could be a different relationship if it has rained recently. Okay. And then if the flux gaps are too large, we missed a whole day or a couple days, then we use a 5-day linear relationship between Rn and G and Le, and then we use that to gap fill the fluxes if the gaps are too large. So here's an example of some screen and gap fill. This is Le data. This is from Site 3 in 2023 in the middle of the growing season. And so you can see there's multiple days plotted here. And when you see a dark blue, this is a gap-filled value. The pink squares are data that's been screened and is considered, good flux data. So again, we're fortunate here that we don't have a lot of missing H and Le data. Okay, the screening and gap filling becomes more important for CO2 fluxes, but for H and Le, we're sitting in the middle of a large field, and we have the GIL omnidirectional sonic anemometer, and it's sitting on top of the tower, and so we don't have a lot of bad wind directions, put it that way. So yeah, then like I said, the Eddy Pro manual is online and the Tovi manual is online. So, but yeah, these are pretty involved software programs, basically. So just a couple of closing remarks. The fluxes require rigorous processing and gap filling, to get the highest quality flux data, and then we've found that we've had to use our own methodology to make sure we get good screening, again, to enhance the overall data quality. And then we're starting to use the Tovi to facilitate correction and gap filling for the fluxes. So thank you, Reggiani, for doing a lot of this.
Welcome.
Thanks, Andy. So, shall we, Larry or Martin, do you have any questions, or can we release the presentation?
You can probably release it. I mean, I think I have a really good idea what you're doing, but I don't know the details of Eddy Pro, but I know what it's supposed to be doing, all those things. So obviously it's a big learning curve to run that properly.
Yes.
But yeah.
Andy, do you wanna stop sharing then?
Yep.
Well, I presume you do a similar process, but you're using your own software.
Yeah. It's so that one pager. Well, I also sent you yesterday. Everyone else was watching the Super Bowl. I sent you text that we give the River Commission on our procedures that's more detailed about what we run and what we use. But basically, Martin can interject here, but we start by, we break the data into 1 day blocks into ASCII, and then make sure they're formatted the way we want them. And so that, since we sample at 20 hertz, that's a pretty good size data file. They're about 1.75 million lines long, but they're still, you can get them into an editor, the editor we use, and you can scroll through and see them. And then Martin wrote a routine, and what he does is he plots 24-hour graphs just for a first overview of what do the data look like. Does it look like it's a reasonable set of wind velocities, water vapor density, sonic temperature, etc.? Or do you see some striking problems? So it looks like a reasonable day or a not reasonable day. And then I have written for my master's student separately, but he does this later in the spike detection. We first go through and it just quickly reads through those files and finds any missing records or any time diagnostics are being triggered on the sonic or the erga, and just notes, by the way, there's diagnostics here during these times and there's missing records here. Here's how many are missing, and you have to decide what you want to do about that later. If there's small number of records and you're only interested in the flux, doesn't matter. Just cut, they can be missing. For time series analysis, that's more important. Then, so Martin then identifies areas where there's distinct bad data that's more than just fractions of seconds or seconds, and those get put into a special place that they need to be gap filled, and whether it's hourly or daily or whatever. And then the others, we run through a spike detection algorithm. I found that the Vickers and Mark just didn't work well enough to meet our needs. So what this one does is it slides windows over the data of different sizes, and then it looks for number of standard deviation. The point is for the average of that window, but then it also looks at the deviation from the average of that window in the absolute magnitude of it. So for instance, if all the values are really close together, the standard deviation can be really tiny, and you can have a point that's 8 standard deviations off, and there's nothing wrong with that point. So the double check is it physically different enough that you're worried about it? And then if it finds any of those criteria, it then prints out on the screen 60 values before it and 60 values after it, plus that point. And then you look at it and say, yeah, it's a spike, or no, there's nothing wrong with that point, or it might be a set of points. And so then if you tell it, I want you to fill in this point, maybe there's one of them, maybe there's 30 of them, it'll go through and then linearly interpolate between the last good point and the first good point afterwards, and it just changes the file. And so that's a tedious method that seems to get rid of most of the spikes. You don't have to get all the spikes out, okay? You just need to get a lot of the big ones out. And so all those things up till now, I think Martin would testify, that's the lion's share of his time, is getting it to the point where the data can now go into the Flux program. And that's always changing. So what I'm doing now is I've got a new detrending. So I was never happy with any of the detrending for spectral analysis. And I found an algorithm that I coded up that works extremely well. And if you, I coded it in Fortran, but if you use Python, you can actually call the algorithm in a library. and it detrends the data really good. And so I tried it with some of the flux data, and what I found is during periods where the temperature has a really strong trend, you can detrend it, but it didn't affect the heat flux because it's a covariance. So both of them would have to have different trends in order to have an effect. But it won't hurt to detrend it. So I'm going to add that where it just detrends the data anyway. All right. And then as far as stationarity, I'm adding that too, where kind of like what he's talking about. But what I have found is you look at some data sets where, according to Thomas Fulken, it violates the concept of stationarity. It's a somewhat arbitrary set of values he uses. Then when I go and calculate the fluxes, there's nothing wrong with them. Okay. So I'm kind of at a loss to know what to do. Like Andy said, you can use the agreed upon set of statistics to identify something as not meeting stationary standards. But then I don't know what to do then. You can just throw it out, but is the error in gap filling bigger than the error of just keeping it? And I have not come to grips with that. Okay. I think the whole community has to realize that some of these measures of like what's a spike and what's stationary and what's not stationary, there's a lot of arbitrariness in choosing what those values are. And I think the community has to come to grips with that. And I agree with Andy. It's not as simple as just following one recipe. Okay. And I don't know what's going on with EdiPro there, but it sounds like they got just a coding error or something going on there. But I would like, I think, what you guys are doing, it sounds very rational. I think what Chuck McCallum will say is at some point, and we should do this, we should compare the different approaches with the same starting data and see how different our fluxes are. I suspect they won't be very different. But if I'm him, I want us to show that, right? And I think that's where we're headed. Martin, do you want to chime in at all?
No, I mean, yeah, they're your program, so you understand better what they're doing. I do all of my initial cutting things in R, and then for gap filling, I do everything with R-Eddyproc, just because I found that that's a really easy program to use.
But it has problems too, because sometimes it produces gap-filled numbers that, it's empirical. It's using the good data and it's drawing its own relationships. But sometimes I'll look at the values and I'm like, this doesn't make sense if I'm looking before or after. And so during those times, I go to an evaporative fraction like Andy's talking about and fill them in that way. So we kind of have a double way. The EdiProc does the first fill in, and then I look at it, Martin looks at it, and if we see stuff that just doesn't look very good, then we try another approach. I like, I was doing evaporative fraction during versus time of day. It's stable in the center of the day, and then it's high in the morning and evening. I like the second order polynomial idea. Then you could just do it as one shot, because it is very wavy, right? So yeah, this whole idea of gap filling, that's an unresolved issue too. We do the best we can, right? And you guys are obviously using a rational approach. I don't know how the Tovi software works, but it'll run into the same issues of, making the best choices that you can. And some data sets, Martin tells me, are just a mess, where it's raining all the time or they're irrigating all the time, and there's lots of gaps of different sizes, and those take a long time to analyze. And the well-behaved data sets are like easy peasy, right? They behave themselves, they run fast. I chose deliberately to break all the different analyses into different software, and that's partly because of the way I was educated, is that instead of having a giant piece of software that does everything, I was taught, no, you break it into modules, in pieces. That way, if you need to understand what's going on, you don't have to try to swallow a camel, okay? You can go to the individual sections. So that's why we've deliberately have these different programs to do different things, like all our spectral analysis, those are all separate programs. So that doesn't mean that's the way to do it. I know, like Eddie Pro and others, I can see it's very seductive to just have it all, one program do it all. But since I wrote it all myself, that just didn't work with the way my brain works. Okay. So I broke it into deliberate pieces, and then we run those pieces separately, and we kind of know what each one's doing. And I just am more comfortable in that. That doesn't mean that's the right way of doing it. It's just the way it works for me. And maybe it's too old school. Back when I was taught programming, memory was a big thing. It's like, oh, you don't read things into a big array. That chews up too much memory. You read them one line at a time, etc. And they just beat you over the head. Now, I just, read them into as big of an array as my compiler will let me do. And I don't even worry about it. But back then, there was a certain culture in how you were taught to program. So I think, we need to figure out a way to just do some cross-referencing.
Yeah,
Like
perhaps
we take same data set and see what we get.
or you have a data set that you've processed, the same data set you send to us, and we send you one of our data sets.
Yeah, we do it both ways. I like
You do
that.
it
Yeah.
both ways, right?
Yep. Double blind study, kind of. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We find that converting the data over to ASCII with the Campbell system is pretty straightforward. I'm helping a student of Burdett's who has a LICOR eddy covariance system. And she's been working with me and my grad student to gradually learn how to process the data. And getting those data into ASCII form the way we want it has turned out to be very problematic. And finally, last week, she got them to admit on the phone that they have bugs in their software. Okay. And so she's given me these, she's able to do one day at a time only, convert to ASCII, and it reports the seconds as integers. So you'll have 20 lines where the second says 20, and then 20 where it says 21. Each one's actually a 20th of a second. And they can't tell her how to fix that problem. So I had to sit down and write code to convert them all to hundreds of seconds. So I don't know what's going on there, if you've run into any of that or not. Maybe with using Eddie Pro, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I'm not
The other
sure
thing
what-
she said is last summer she lost like 2 weeks of data because I don't understand this, but apparently LICOR can go into your system and monkey with it. And something went wrong and she was not getting data for 2 weeks and there's nothing she could do about it. So she just lost it. I'm assuming they're not doing that to you.
Well, it depends if the tower has the SmartFlux system or not,
Okay.
right? If it's got the SmartFlux and Flux Suite, then it's connected through the tower, through the cell phone tower, right? And LICOR has access to the data stream as well. But they're not supposed to go in and modify stuff without us knowing, right, Ashish?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know. Again, that's all new to me. So, but I like to look at, to be honest, I don't even know why they bother recording the data in IEEE binary anymore. Memory sticks are so big, they ought to just record it in ASCII, okay? Because the way they record it isn't just that it's in binary. If it was in binary, it's not an issue. It's not hard to convert binary to ASCII. It's the peculiar table format they use, which is bizarre. And so it's like this black box in card converting a lot of data, at least with the Campbell system, it takes time. Okay. And so I don't know why they continue to do that, but we do like to look at the files and, just to see, reformat them so that they're column oriented in a way that's very easy to scroll through. But I'm sure you've done all that. And then we have found breaking them into one day is just sort of a nice medium. You don't want to do hourly. That's too many. But if you start going 10 days at a time, now each one of your files is, 17 million lines long, and that's getting a little unwieldy. Okay. So the way we run the Flux program is Martin names the files in a sequential way, and then we just run the Fortran as a batch. And it just goes, does one, does the next, does next, does the next. In the program will run in a full day in 10 seconds. That's how fast Fortran is. And so that part just flies, right? But once in a while, you think you cleaned everything up. I don't know if you've run into this, but you think, hey, we got a clean file. And the Fortran program stops between hour 8 and 9. And what has happened is it's found a wart in the data that it can't read that somehow got through. So then you got to go and find that hour and say, what the hell is the matter with this hour? Usually it just means there's one bad data point in one record, and you go and remove the record and it runs fine. But it's sort of an iterative thing. And then when we get the final fluxes, I'll look at a value and say, oh, this LE flux at 2 p.m. here is crazy, absolutely impossible. So now you got to go back and look at that hour and say, what the hell's the matter with it? So it's kind of an iterative process where when you think you're done, you're not, but eventually you get it all. That's sort of where we're at. I don't know, maybe there's a better way of doing it. Martin, have you run AnyPro?
I've tried. I have not run it successfully.
I think it would be a good thing for us to learn
I have
how
it
to
on my
do.
system.
And you could probably get help from these guys who are
Yeah.
experts at running it. Because you understand the science, it's just understanding how to make it run the way you want it to run. Which is going
Yeah,
to
I'd ask about the specific flags and
yeah,
things you guys use.
it would be worth playing around with that.
Yeah, I have it. I have access to it.
But it sounds like we're both doing the same basic QA QC, which is identifying bad data, fixing it or getting rid of it, gap filling, running, looking at the fluxes. Now, our spectra have generally, not always, generally indicated that over a range of conditions, we get better results if we average for an hour. Okay? So we generally average for an hour, but there are times when you can do 30 minutes. But if you have light winds, a lot of convection and very light winds, you find is 30 minutes isn't long enough. The co-spectra is showing big contributions at much longer time scales than that. So I think you'll just get to know your sites and which ones might need longer averaging periods. The other thing is 10 hertz, plenty fast to get the fluxes. We go 20 because when we go to spectra, you run into the Nyquist frequency, and now you're only getting data back for 10 hertz. So at 10 hertz, you're only going to get data back for 5. So it's one of those things where you're not punished to oversample, but you're punished to undersample. So we go ahead and sample at 20 hertz. It just means you have bigger data sets. And, you can do it either way. I don't think for fluxes, 10 hertz is plenty fast. Oh, and I could send you the newest Flux program. It even has comments in it. For the high frequency corrections, we use Bill Massman's papers. And for the separation, we used those, but now the separation with the Ergoson, there is no separation. However, we still do shifting covariances just to double check that everything's aligned. So we do the covariance by sliding the data backwards and forwards. Right now I use up to 20 scans, and and then finds the maximum covariance. And with the Ergosan, the maximum is almost always right about 0. And but we do that just as a matter of course. I actually learned that from Shashi Verma, where he did that routinely long before anyone else was even worried about it. And he goes, "Oh no, we want to make sure we get the maximum covariance so that we know that everything is synchronous." And that was a good thing to do.
Yeah, now I was going to ask you a question on the end, but now that you brought Shashi's name up, could you explain to everyone your Nebraska-Kansas connection?
Oh yeah, so I went to Nebraska for my master's, and it was, I guess, during sort of the real heyday of agricultural meteorology at that institution. And it was run by Norm Rosenberg, he was a real visionary. And Shashi Verma was highly technically gifted at turbulence and micrometeorology. And then there was Blaine Glad. He was micrometeorology soils. And then eventually Al Weiss moved from Scotts Bluff. He did a lot of microclimate. And so I learned my first ag meteorology from them. And I worked out in the field, and that was the days where you soldered and you wired into junction boxes, and then wires going to the data logger, and programs were punched on cards and read by cards, and you had to learn a lot about measurements. I learned a lot about measurements there in the field. You know, how many microvolts is it for 1 degree C for a thermocouple? It's 40 actually. And all that kind of stuff, and you know, how to get resolution, and how they had sensors that would measure temperature and wet bulb temperature, and they would reverse, go back and forth to remove bias, and they would measure the thermocouples differentially. And I could sense at the time how good these guys were, and now I really appreciate how good they were. They were really good. And for reasons that I only partially understand, these kinds of things happen in institutions. Most of them are gone, and not many replacements, which is too bad. They were as good as anybody in the world at doing what they did. And actually, I met a guy when I was leaving. So I went by Nebraska on my way to UC Davis, where they asked me to stay in Nebraska, but I decided I wanted to just spread out and do something different. So I agreed to go to UC Davis, and I stopped by Lincoln on the way, and I met a guy who was my age. His name was Dennis Baldacchi, who was there, and he had just come from UC Davis and got his BS in atmospheric science, and I was going to Davis to get my PhD in atmospheric science. And so we chatted a bit, and we've been friends ever since. And he did some great work with Shashi when he was there.
Yeah, and Andy worked with Shashi as
Yeah.
well, right, Andy? And you're muted.
Shashi was my advisor.
Oh, you can't do better.
No, that's for sure.
So actually, at the Ag and Forest Meteorology meetings in Denver this May, I helped organize. We're having a special session for Dennis Baldacchi. He's retiring in July.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did you hear what he's doing?
I don't know what he's doing. I didn't ask him. I asked Chada usually. He works with him a lot.
Yeah, let me find the email from him.
So while he looks for the email, are you're going to be involved with the energy balance closure workshop then? Are you going to?
Yeah, I helped. I'm a speaker, and I helped. I'm actually the first person who went to Bill Custis and said, "Houston, we have a problem of how to close, when to close, whether to close." And I go, I give the Bureau of Reclamation 2 numbers, one without closure, one with closure. And sometimes those numbers are substantially different. And I said, this is totally unacceptable. These are real numbers now. They're using them. So Now that is getting pretty well organized for next September, and a lot of these things are going to be discussed. You know, not just why can't we get 100% closure. That's probably less important than how high should it be before we're concerned, or how low should it be before we're concerned, and what do we do about it? Can we come to any kinds of consensus? So, for instance, Dennis has very strong opinions. You do not force closure. Okay, he won't do it. He said the fluxes you're getting from the eddy covariance systems are correct, and you don't get closure because of other problems with mismatching scales, et cetera, et cetera. Other people, John Norman's like, no, you got to close. Oh, you believe in conservation of energy, you have to close. And so the community is so schismed. And when you're doing just research, it didn't matter that much. But when you're given real numbers that translate into acre feet to hydrologists and water managers, now it does matter. Okay? So if somebody gets 70% closure, that difference in millimeters of water is big. And if they ask me which one's right, I have trouble answering. I go, the only thing I can tell them is, well, they're both wrong. And if it were my water, with what I know, this is what I tell them. If it was my water and what I know, I would split the difference. So my hunch is we're adding too much in when we force closure, but yet at the same time, we are definitely underestimating the fluxes for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
If your closure's high, when you're over 80%, it doesn't make that much difference. But, I occasionally run into some people who don't know what they're doing, and they'll admit they're getting closures of 50%. That's a big red flag. Something's horribly wrong there.
When you give the data to the Bureau and you force the closure, are you using the Bowen ratio to
Yeah,
force it?
that's what we're doing. We don't stuff it all into LE. And that's based on the philosophy that if there's an underestimate, you're probably underestimating both of them. But you don't want to. You still want to weight them. So if H is really small and you use that ratio, you'll change H very little and you'll change LE a lot. Some people say no, it's the biggest is LE, and I don't know. They might be right. What we have found, and Martin presented this at the Ag and Forest Met meetings, the drier it is, the better the closure. The higher the LE is, and he had this unique data set, the one from Colorado, where they curtailed irrigation for 1 year as part of this study where the farmer was paid not to irrigate. And then they irrigated it again the next year. So same site, same sensors, everything. And you can see when they started irrigating, the closure went down 10 points. And when it was not irrigated, we got 93% closure. So that suggests that maybe LE is somehow being underestimated worse. And I don't know. There's not enough data to answer that question, but it's certainly suspicious that something's going wrong with LE. Now, whether that's a sensor problem or what, I have no idea. But I've talked to other people and they've seen the same thing. They go to really dry sites, they get good closure. They go to really highly transpiring sites, the closure goes down. So something's going on there. But I give the Bureau both of them. What they do with them is, they send them to Open ET, and then they send both of them, and now it's Forest's problem, right? But of course,
because the OET approach is forced closure.
Forced closure, and that's why most of them agree better with the forced closure values.
That's right.
And they might be getting it. I don't know. It's possible they're getting better results for the wrong reasons. It's possible that we should be forcing closure, but I know TSEB is the same thing. When they compare TSEB to our measured fluxes in all these experiments, if they force closure, they get much, much better agreement.
Yeah, we used to talk about this in our class, right, Larry?
Yep. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff going on here in this project, right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of
that's right.
serious science going on. It isn't just a simple network to get numbers.
Well, and then the Upper Colorado has chosen EE metric as the model they're going to use from.
Yeah, I
There's some
that's out of
problems
my
right
league. I
there.
don't know. I mean, they
Yeah,
made a decision. I don't know on what basis, but they did.
yeah,
But of course, OpenET is still showing you a number of them.
yeah. That's
And
right.
of course, the state of the art is on display there. You see X numbers, right?
That's right. And
And
they came up with an ensemble because all models give different results in the same
yes,
location,
so it's
right?
kind of like what the weather forecasters deal with. And the temptation is to use the average of the ensemble because it makes sense. But hypothetically, any one of them could be right. So, but again, that's not in my wheelhouse right now. I think it just shows that OpenET is advancing rapidly, but it's still in a juvenile state, right? Because we
Yeah,
haven't sorted all this stuff out yet.
that's right.
Um, but yeah, they'll love your data because you're giving them how many stations now?
10 more
10
stations.
more stations. That's a lot. That's a big thing.
Well, I'm going to share my screen and get your opinion, if that's okay,
Sure.
of what we're having to deal with. Um, let's see, I think it's this one here. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this the pivot on the left, wedged between the two highways, right, is where they
Yeah.
want us to put the tower. The tower would go on the east side of it because um, so that's what it looks like. It's this pivot down here, okay? And the wind comes from the west, west southwest, okay? And on the west side of the field is that a
Uh,
row of trees. And we said, we don't like this site. This has got too much, there's roads, there's
yeah.
trees upsetting the wind flow, right? We want to find another location, and they're sort of insistent.
How much fetch is there for to where the tower would have been sited? How far away from those trees is it?
Okay, so going back here, the trees are along this highway over here on the left.
Yeah.
See the dark things there are the trees,
Yeah.
right? And the tower would go over on the other side of the pivot. So this is a smaller pivot, so it might be a few hundred meters of fetch.
Uh,
Do you think
okay.
that by then it would be okay?
I
The
don't know. I was thinking it was a big pivot, but you only
No,
got
it's a
300
smaller
meters
pivot.
in diameter. Okay.
Well, the standard pivot is 800 meters in diameter,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
So
this is
you're
a smaller
small.
one. This is probably 600 meters.
Okay. Okay. So looking at those trees, I mean, it's not ideal, but that's a ways out. They're not that tall and dense. If you were within 50, 100 meters, I definitely think you could have all kinds of weird vortex shedding and stuff going on. You might get away, but it isn't, I mean, it's not, it wouldn't be my first choice.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's not our first choice, and we asked them to look for another site around there. This is where the 10th tower is going to go because we got
Okay.
9 up last year.
And it's going to be it's center pivot. Is it hay or a crop?
It's hay.
It's hay.
Yeah, yeah,
So center pivots, we're lucky in that the only one we have, he has end guns and he irrigates outside the center pivot.
yeah.
So he's growing blue or organic blue corn, and so Martin has the Eddie covariance just outside the hardware of the pivot, but there's a corn crop.
Yeah, so you have to keep raising
Yeah,
the
yeah, he has
tower,
to
right?
go and keep moving the tower up because it's maize. But otherwise, center pivots, of course, they have logistical difficulties, right?
Yeah,
And I thought if I had to bite the bullet on a center pivot, that I feel more comfortable if we could find in between the hoses a location if the boom was high enough and go into the field.
Yeah,
Because on the edge of the
if it's all
field, outside
fossil,
it, you're getting entrainment, all kinds of weird stuff going on.
that's right. But again, it all depends on how tall the pivot is and what.
Yes, yes.
With corn, it would be possible, but with hay or
Hay,
something that only
yeah,
grows to a meter, maybe, right?
yeah. I'm surprised in
right.
Wyoming they're using center pivots for hay. We
Yeah.
don't see too much of that around here for that, but okay.
Well, and just
Yeah, I agree with you. I
going
mean,
going back in time, right? Even if we had, imagine, if we're on the outside of a pivot and the end gun comes and
yeah.
irrigates, well, remember the fine wire thermocouples? We
Oh,
couldn't do
yeah.
it with that,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Well, some of those, all you got to do is look at them and they break. Um, well, the other thing is, you send a sheesh out on a guerrilla mission with a chainsaw.
Well, we have to worry about mowing inside the enclosure where these towers are, right?
That's an issue. So Martin weed whacks them
Yeah,
when they
that's
cut.
right.
He goes and weed whacks.
Well,
So
one thing we got to coordinate is whether we can help you and you help us on the field stuff, right, in the future.
yeah,
Because,
I'm sure
you
because
know,
we're in the same general geographic region,
because you have one in down south as well, don't you? In Colorado or
Bloomington,
New Mexico or something?
Bloomfield.
Oh, a
Yeah,
sheesh.
we got one in Bloomfield, New Mexico, and we've got one in Palisades, the peach orchard in Colorado.
That's near Grand Junction.
Go ahead, Ashish.
I have a
Yeah,
question. So about the weed whacking, so you guys follow the same routine when the farmer harvests?
Yeah, I find out when they cut, and then I follow through and get there within a day or two.
Yeah, it's mainly the RN and G that get affected. The eddy covariance footprint doesn't actually start for some meters upwind,
Yeah, that's right.
right? And so it's not effect, but it'll really mess up the RN and G if you don't cut it the time they did. Yeah. So that's an issue of how good the landowner is at communicating with you,
Yeah, well,
as
we
Mark
have
knows. So he's often on the phone with these people. When are you going to cut? When are you going to plant the corn? When are you going to harvest the corn? And that's important to know. He does put the cameras up, but that only tells you afterward. Well, I guess you can look on a real time, can't you, Martin? See that day?
We don't have real time yet.
Okay, so he has
I
to
do
pull
that this year.
those. You can look to see in the past what they were doing later with
You
those.
can also
so that
pretty
raises
clearly
a-
tell just from looking at the data too.
Okay, so you do have video cameras at each tower of yours?
No, they're not video. They're
Trail
wildlife
cams.
snapshots. So you tell it how often to take a picture.
Okay. Yeah, we're trying to figure out what to put on our towers.
You can put real live cameras, but they're going to cost you a lot more.
That's right, and they use energy, right?
Oh
Which-
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
they're going to draw
that's-
more current.
Yeah, that's right.
So we since we're only running November or 1st April to November, we've never had any power problems. Just 200-watt solar panels, plenty big, and some good big deep cycle batteries. If you want to run in the winter eddy covariance, then you're going to need more solar panel. If you just run the weather station component, not a big thing.
So what do you do in the winter? Do you take any of the sensors down?
Yeah, Martin goes and he takes the eddy covariance stuff off.
Like the Sonic and the Ergoson and
Yep.
the net radiometer and all that, huh?
And then the
Yeah.
weather stuff is already on a separate logger, so he doesn't have to do anything with that. It just is measured by the 1000. But he does have to go there, and then when he takes them down, that's when we get them recalibrated during the winter.
Right. How often do you calibrate?
once a year.
Oh, you do it every year, huh?
Yeah.
Campbell does it for you?
Yeah. The sonic we can't do. The
We could zero span our own, but
you
yeah.
can zero span, but if, you could do CO2 if we went to Bruce and got some standards of different CO2. For water, then you need a dew point generator and you need a lot of plumbing, and basically it's just expensive and a real pain in the ass. So they'll go and check it, and um, they'll they'll check the zero offset and check the span, and the worst case scenarios they go and recalibrate under various sets, but usually they can just do a span check.
How much do they charge you for that?
Depends on what they have to do. What is it, Martin? The standard.
1,400 this year per unit.
Yeah, and then they also, they check the motor, they replace the CO2 scrubbing chemical, the desiccant, keep an eye on the duty cycle, things like that. But it's going to be more if like they had to replace a transducer or something like that.
Yeah.
We find that there are some zero offsets that appear now and then on the erga, usually when they get dirty. That's our usually best estimate of that something's on the lens. According to Campbell, the signal strength over 70 means there's no problem. That is not correct. So we have Martin will see signal strengths over 70, and then we compare the water vapor density with the aspirated shield, and they're not even close. They go and clean them, they're right on. So figuring out on your system when the erga needs to be clean is something you're going to have to determine, but the diagnostic isn't necessarily going to tell you.
We brought them all in to do the zero and span this
Good.
winter.
Yeah, and you can do zero offset in the field. Hypothetically, you can do a span in the field, but now you got to bring gases in there of very accurate known concentrations. And then you're doing it outside with the sleeve. It's going to be much less controlled. But there are people that do that because they just simply can't take their sensors down.
We're hoping to do it in Andy's lab.
Well, that would be cool.
He's got the setup.
Yeah. I used to send some of mine over to John Pruger because they have a dew point generator and they built all the plumbing and everything. So it can be done. The other thing is it won't matter to you because you're just starting, but we've been running now eight years with the Bureau, and I have to keep reminding them that all sensors have a lifetime. There's only so many duty hours that they're going to continue to function properly, and we don't know exactly how long that is. And so they need to start amortizing or depreciating the equipment. And they're very hesitant to do that.
So you don't know what they do with the data, or have you any inkling? Or
Oh, well, Jim Prairie, he used to send it to DRI, and he sends it to Forest.
OpenET.
And then what he does with it inside the Bureau, I don't know, other than it goes to somebody that checks it against the remote sensing.
Yeah. DRI is essentially OpenET.
Yep. And Martin used to send the footprint rasters every hour to DRI because they need that to validate. But now I think Martin told me that Volk does it himself, right?
Yeah, John Volk does it on his program now.
Yeah, that's another thing that's nice about Tovi is that Tovi does the footprint as well.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. It's not hard to run the footprints on it. The model runs in like a second. But he did initially have to do it every hour and get it into a raster format so that they could use it for their validation. But now we just run it for ourselves. And we don't have to run it much once we establish a tower. We know which wind directions are good and which ones aren't. In Kremlin, we got such a big field, it can take them all. Okay, it can take any wind direction. That's the best.
Yeah. So, okay, I think action items is we're going to each select the data set to send to each other, right?
Yeah, that's a
What do you
great idea.
suggest? A day, a few days, or how? What do you
Maybe a few
suggest?
days. Now, when you start talking about days, I don't know. Martin, can that get put on box? Martin, you're muted.
Yeah, it should be able to be
Okay.
put on box.
Otherwise, like with some stuff that I've worked with in California, they just send us either a disk or a memory stick, a big memory stick. But you're not going to send them over email or anything like that. But you could probably put them in box, and
Yeah.
we could do the same. And yeah, a few of them of some different conditions, maybe, and just see what we find.
Let's start with a very well-behaved data set, right?
Sure.
Of a few days, right? And go from there, right?
Yes. Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Easy
Okay.
enough.
That's a great idea.
Any other comments or questions from anyone else? I think this has been very productive meeting
Yes.
and
And we
discussion.
can, at the end, I think we can write something up to give them a document of what we do, that we do it in different ways, but we're essentially doing the same kinds of things.
Yeah.
And how we're going to do some cross-checking, which is always a good thing. I mean, a few years ago, I sent my code for the Flux program at the time to Joe Alfieri, and he recoded it in MATLAB. And then we went and got some data sets, and I compared the fluxes I get with the fluxes he got. And they were close. They're not exactly the same, but they're really close. And that's always a good thing to do, right?
Yeah.
To have an independent check. Otherwise, if you got a program that's thousands of lines long, how do you know it's right?
Yeah.
And,
You know-
if some grad student has been messing with it, you can be pretty sure it's not right. And so it's a good thing to do anyway.
You know that
Run
Joe,
you can do that too. I think Ameriflux still has gold files. Do they still do that? They would send you a file of time series data, and then you would analyze it and send them your results, and they would compare with their own software. We did that some years ago. And that was just to make sure that operators at the Ameriflux site had some semblance of knowing what the hell they were doing. Okay. It's not a high bar.
One thing that we had discussed earlier is data formatting. And what forms of data should be shared with farmers versus Ameriflux, et cetera. So just flagging that if there's time.
Oh, you mean output data, not input.
yeah,
Output, yeah.
Okay, output. We keep all the hourly values for everything, but we report daily values to the Bureau. They don't want the hourly values. So we report daily values, and we report them in millimeters of water. And they seem happy with that. I also do some other things, like when H is negative, and now we have my master's student is doing a more sophisticated analysis of how much advection influences ET, has to do with calculating the flux of saturation deficit. And we now give them a rough estimate of how many millimeters of water each day potentially could have come from advection by the negative H's. We give them that too. But basically it's on a daily scale because that's what they want.
So, but the OpenET folks want the hourly data, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, they have
Yes.
the hourly.
They get it.
They get it. And nobody wants the time series data. At least they haven't. Because that's too intimidating, right? The only thing we have to do is sometimes our stations are all the same format that the data logger writes the time series, but like if yours came in, it would be a different format. We would just change the order, how we read them. Real simple.
Yeah, that's probably going to be the case, and then you're going to have to do your ASCII conversion with our data when we send it to you, right?
Yeah, hopefully I mean, she's able to do it now day at a time. You're supposed to be able to do it a whole bunch of data and it would break it into days because it has that option, but it just didn't work. And, but we can fix that and I can fix the seconds. I already wrote the code to do that. It's easy. That's not a problem. But they really ought to fix it. And she said that their response to her was, well, we'll fix it when we update the software. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You fix it now. If something's broken, you fix it. But whatever. But yeah, we would just want, like you're using the wind velocities, the sonic temperature, the water vapor density, the CO2 density, the pressure, and the diagnostics. That's it. And the time in a reasonable format. So like we use year, day of year, hour, minute, second, separated with tabs. If we get the crazy format that has colons and stuff, then we just have to change it.
You're going now?
Yeah.
Do you have the keys?
Well, very good. So we'll find a data set or two to send to you, and you do the
Cool.
same.
Because I have connected.
And then
another-
Ashish,
So just
you
take
mute
these.
your hello.
Okay.
He's talking to someone.
Sorry, could you order the other? It's gonna be too
Yes, yes, it's all
There, I've
ordered.
muted
They're
him.
Shipping it overnight.
So
Okay, yeah, no, that would be great. And I'll
Let me know if
yeah,
we'll go forward from there.
I agree. Then we
Tomorrow
then
I'll
we
not be
compare
in town.
and write it up and say,
Yep.
be proactive with the
Yeah,
Upper Colorado.
and
folks.
share information with each other about what we find. We're finding these kinds of problems in our data. You might want to look for that, or we find that this doesn't have to be perfect and it still works. And
Yeah.
there aren't that many of us that are doing the data analysis the hard way, right? And so we ought to be communicating. Because there's a lot of people out there now, they think they can just set up the system, turnkey system, and it just runs and it writes a bunch of numbers, and that's the end of the story. Okay. And that's a scary proposition.
Yeah.
But those of us who do it, we can help each other, learn from each other.
Oh, who
I already
knows?
learned a few
I-
things today just following Andy's presentation.
Yeah. Do you want us to share that with you, the presentation?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially nice because he has the Eddie Pro menus.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
and
was
then,
Reggiani.
we'll Andy, you'll create a PDF and share it, right?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, that would
Great.
be really useful to us because
Great.
we're trying to figure out a way, either maybe using that, and also I'm thinking of just trying to relax the spike detection algorithm so it isn't so fastidious, to reduce the time a lot, because my hunch is that some of those spikes, it just doesn't matter. They're just not going to change the flux. They're cosmetic. Okay.
Related, yeah.
Yeah. And so we're trying to do that, and maybe utilizing the Eddie Pro for some of this stuff will do it. And then Martin will have to spend a lot less time playing around, cleaning up the data, and then he can have more time to do some analyses and other things that he's doing.
No, yeah. Well, we can help get you up and running with that software, Martin. Okay.
That would be great.
Uh,
Look like they're having a storm south of you today, huh?
yeah, it's going to snow south of us.
Yeah.
I'm leaving for the Dominican Republic. Ivo and I
Oh
we
boy.
have to go to Omaha at 3:15 in the morning. Isn't that fun? To catch
Well,
a
you'll
flight.
miss the winter.
I miss the dry cold in Utah. That's what I
Yeah.
miss.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. This winter's been very mild.
So a couple of last comment. You mentioned Joe Alfieri. He's our neighbor now. You know that,
Yep.
right?
Yep. He's in Ames.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember getting a phone call from Thanos before he hired him,
Yeah.
and it's a good move for Joe. And he and John they're not the same, but they're synergistic.
Yeah.
So that's a good lab.
No, and as you know, we work with John directly, and so do
Yeah.
you, right? On different.
Oh, he's been giving me for 2 years the trials and tribulation of the Los Gatos
Oh,
N2O
yeah.
sensor. Oh my God. He has
And
put
he's
in a
been living
hell of
that.
amount of work
And
trying to
he's been
get that
living
thing to
that.
work.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think they're getting really close now.
Yeah, that's right. Well, great.
I told him I have enough trouble with heat and water vapor and CO2. I'll leave the trace gases to somebody else. When you start talking parts per billion,
Yeah.
uh, I'll let a younger group of people deal with that problem. I'm getting too old for that kind of stuff.
Well, great. Well, thank you everyone for.
Just
Yeah.
Christopher, the email from Dennis.
Yeah.
So I guess in January he received the Suomi medal from AMS. I've never heard of that before.
I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to
Okay.
check that out.
But he says he was Shashi forwarded an email that Dennis sent him. He said he's going to retire in July, and then he's going to spend 2 months in Göttingen, Germany,
Yeah.
as a Gauss professor. So that was home of Ludwig Prandtl and Theodore von Karman. You know, the Prandtl number and the von Karman
Wow.
constant.
Wow.
So, and you know what? The other ironic thing is, their grad students had grad students, had grad students, had grad students, and eventually one of those grad students was Shashi.
Wow. So
Yeah.
it falls.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And then Dennis is, of course, Shashi's grad
Yep.
student. So, yeah.
He's part of the academic lineage.
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
us-
Yeah. So
A lot of us indirectly also connect with Champ Tanner
right. Yeah.
or his
Mhm.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I mean,
So yeah, Dennis is a blue blood.
yeah, I can't imagine Dennis just sitting in the backyard drinking a gin and tonic
Yeah.
alone. He has to be busy.
Yeah.
So this is good. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Well, great. Thank you everyone. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks, Christopher.
Thanks, and let's move ahead with the plan of comparing.
Yeah, enjoy your visit to the DR. Stay out of Haiti.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to Haiti. That's right. And I am coming to Utah in March. So I'll
Yep,
see
we'll
you.
be here. That's the week after spring break. It'll be good to see you.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Look
Very
forward
good.
to it.
Okay.
Take
Bye,
care,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.